Welcome to video 3 in my Introduction to Capital Gains Tax series, where I've just been covering the real basics of this important investor tax. I thought I'd finish off by taking a look at the really slightly odd rules that govern share transactions, because an awful lot of you will be thinking about share disposals. After all, we don't always sell properties all the time or anything else. It's more shares tend to be the sort of assets that people worry about much more often than other types of chargeable assets. And there is a quirk here. It's called the share matching rules. And what the share matching rules do is prevent an old practice called bed and breakfasting. Right? Now, bed and breakfasting was clever people or clever brokers working out that their clients needed to use up something I talked about in the last video, the annual exemption, currently £10,900, before the end of the tax year. Because if you don't use that exemption by the 5th of April, you lose it. You can't roll it forward and say, well, I didn't use last year, so I'll claim 2 next year. Okay, it doesn't work that way. You have to use it or lose it. Now, of course, to use an exemption that's built on selling stuff, you've got to sell something. But what if you don't actually want to really sell the asset in question? Okay, so imagine you've got a portfolio of shares. You're thinking, it's coming towards the end of the tax year. I could really do with getting some of this out of the tax net, use that 10,900 exemption, but I don't want to sell my shares. What am I going to do? Because if I sell them, I've got rid of them. All right, and then they're gone. But I want them back. So people used to do bed and breakfasting, and that was where they do an arrangement with their broker. So the broker, just before the 5th of April, would buy some shares from the client, triggering potential taxable gain absorbed by the annual exemption, and just after the tax year, a couple of days afterwards, they'd buy the shares back. So purely window dressing, a little deal for you and your broker. The broker's got no intention of keeping those shares he's buying off you, you've got no intention of getting rid of them properly, but it would trigger a nice little sale that would use up that annual exemption and mean that that little portion of shares would then suffer much less tax. Okay, so Inland Revenue, or now HMRC I should say, came up with a way of stopping that. It's called the share matching rules. Here's briefly how they work. All right. So what they've done is they've said, right, bed and breakfasting we don't like. So imagine here's today. All right, you make a sale. All right, selling say 1,000 shares, and that will mean you've got some proceeds. All right, positive X for a positive number. So that'll give you some sales proceeds. Now, here's where the share matching rules come in. What cost are you going to deduct to get to your overall profit? That's what the share matching rules. So there's profit. Try and deal with. Because if you think about it, you could, as an investor, be buying and selling shares all year. Right? And if you think about it, you could then pick and choose which transactions to match against each other. You could say, well, I'm selling 1,000 shares today, so I'll match the proceeds against the cost of the shares I bought 6 months ago, because that gives me exactly a £10,900 capital gain, which will all be absorbed by the annual exemption. So you could kind of play around with the numbers to get the result you want. So HMRC, believe it or not, have stepped in and said, we will tell you how to find the cost of the shares you're selling. In other words, which shares to put in here to get that and work out any capital gain. Here's how they do it. They say, right, okay, number 1, have you bought any shares on the same day as you're making the sale? I suppose that's an obvious place to start. If you bought any shares today, those are the ones you're selling today. All right, and that'll give you your gain, and off you go. If the answer is no, so I haven't bought any shares today, I'm selling today, I haven't bought any, then what you do, and this will sound a bit weird, but number 2 is you look forward into the next 30 days. Did you make any purchases? This sounds a bit surreal, it's like time travel. Did you make any purchases in the next 30 days after the day you made the sale? Now you might be thinking, how would I know that? Because I can't see into the future. But of course, you'll be preparing your capital gains tax calculation sometime after all of this has taken place, because you do your tax returns retrospectively. All right. So for example, the deadline for submitting last year's tax return, that's for the year ending 5th of April 2013, hasn't arrived yet. Still got some time to do it, all right? So in reality, you're not doing this as it happens, you're doing it with the benefit of hindsight. So you will know when it comes to doing this calculation for the tax return purposes, whether you did sell any shares in the next 30 days. If you did, you take the cost into the calculation here. So did you buy any shares in the next 30 days? If so, you bring the cost in here, okay? So just to be clear there, it's purchases in the next 30 days. And that is designed to eliminate that bed and breakfasting, all right? Because that'll cover any arrangement whereby you agreed to buy back shares you've sold from your broker just after the tax year, all right? Imagine the end of the tax year falls sort of there. This rule will stop you doing that little sort of bed and breakfasting arrangement I talked about, all right? Then things get more intuitive in the sense that then the Inland Revenue say, well, if you didn't buy any shares on the same day, if you didn't buy any shares in the next 30 days, then start looking backwards. All right, so when did you buy them? Presumably you bought them quite a while ago, so start looking backwards. And you look for any purchases you made after the 5th of April 1998. It's weird tax rules for you, and there's a big budget in that year. And you bring those into the calculation next, this cost line, and then you go back even further, all right, and look at any purchases before 5th of April 1998. And you can sort of, because your records will probably be out of date on exactly what you bought when, going back quite a few years, you can just bring in a sort of weighted average cost, as they call it, sort of estimated cost, if you like. So there it is. The point I'm trying to make is that one of the little ways that people used to get around capital gains tax, or take advantage of the annual exemption certainly, was to do a little deal with their broker where they arranged to make a sale just before the end of the tax year, buy back the same shares just after the tax year, crystallise a gain, use up the annual exemption. Okay, that no longer works because of this thing called the share matching rules. All right, there are one or two other ways you can reduce your capital gains tax bill perfectly legitimately that do still work, but I'll leave those as the subject of another video. So that wraps up my 3 beginners videos on the basics of capital gains tax.